We are building, because we are building one. We don't have a job evaluation system as of today. And our core philosophy is that we believe that the solution should come from genuine pain points. So we don't want to kind of just create something and throw it out into the world for usage. We believe in listening to people and then trying to solve the real pain points through solutions and technology. So that's pretty much the background in terms of what this session is about. Just a very quick 30-second background. Many of you may not know us. As we saw, we are a 2-year-old company headquartered in London with offices in Dubai and in India. We call ourselves the Tesla of HR. It's a Work 4.0 platform. We have the world's first fully conversational performance management system, where day-to-day interactions basically define how performance is managed. We have a mobile-first employee experience, employee engagement measurement system using nudges. We have a 360 platform, and job evaluation is basically what we are building as we speak. This will be our gateway to reward management, and eventually our goal is to cover all the areas in HR that are value added and non-transactional. So performance, engagement, productivity, talent, reward, that's pretty much the space we want to be in. And without kind of spending any more time on this, let's just move on and look at what we are dealing with today. So in terms of the way job evaluation started, it's something which is 140 years old now, 150 years old. If we go back to the origins in the US Civil Service Commission. So whether you take Frederick Taylor as the father of job evaluation, or whether you take the United States Civil Services Commission, it is a process that has been there for a long time. It's been hugely beneficial. It's something that can save you in a court of law. So obviously it's something that has been of great interest. But as cars have evolved, so I pretty much mapped cars with different stages of evolution. So the first car that you see is the Ford Model A. This was the first Ford car, I think 1903 is when it came out, pretty much around the time when job evaluation was starting up. And then as organizations became bigger and as they kind of bureaucratized the whole process, there was a need for a rational system. So there were kind of complaints about people getting paid differently and it being unfair. And the processes got evolved. They got perfected during the late 1950s. There was this Equal Pay Act of 1963, which required the jobs based on comparable skills, efforts, responsibilities should be paid similar amounts. Now, all of this is great. And it is extremely important that we do not forget where we came from. And the idea is not to kind of completely throw everything away that exists till now and build something. The idea is to build something better. And that's where you have the Tesla. So we see that there are certain limitations in the traditional processes. And you could face it in some parts of your business, if not the entire organization that you deal with. Or depending on the type of organization you work with, you may be perfectly happy with the type of job evaluation that you're using. So that's pretty much the background. The idea is not to kind of start from scratch and build something fancy or ridiculous. The idea is to take what exists and improve it so that it can serve the needs of tomorrow. So that's the background. And with that, we come to our problem statement. So basically, we are talking about 3 things. And this session is about taking inputs from all of you, understanding your perspective, and trying to find out how we can solve these problems. So our problem statements come in 3 parts. 1, as traditional forms of education and experience relatively lose relevance for new jobs. We are not saying they're not important or they're completely irrelevant. We are saying they are relatively losing relevance for new jobs. How can we factor in not just the skills, but also the variability and the pace of change in skills? So certain jobs are a little bit more stable than certain other jobs. Some jobs constantly evolve, some jobs evolve slowly. All jobs evolve, but some evolve faster than the others. So how do we go beyond education and experience, and take into account skills and also the variability in these. So that's the first part of our problem statement. The second part of our problem statement is, as organizations behave more as networks rather than just hierarchical pyramids, how do we alter our perspective of accountability and how do we change our perspective of impact? In traditional organizations, you are accountable for what you promise your line manager. In most organizations, in reality, people don't work only with their line managers. They work with a set of peers, a network, collaborators, and interdependence is a very important thing in how organizations produce results. So that's the second problem statement. And the third part of our problem statement is, how do we create a model that still stands the test of time and also stands the test of legal challenges? Because all of these things are important. At some point of time, someone could decide to go to court saying that system of evaluation is not fair or not robust or not scientific enough. So how do we ensure that all of these challenges are well kind of thought through and taken care of? So that's our background in terms of our problem statement. Once we have job evaluation as a concept, obviously it starts with job analysis and then eventually we go down to the compensable factors. So we do the job evaluation eventually to identify which jobs are bigger, which jobs are smaller, club the jobs into grades, eventually build pay ranges around those grades and pay people. So we are looking at factors that are compensable. And in that sense, there are some traditional compensable factors. And then there are these emerging compensable factors. So traditional compensable factors, easy: experience, education, your working conditions, the complexities of your duty, responsibilities, the consequences of the errors that you make, the confidentiality that is bestowed on your position, and so on, as well as in the kind of first space, early days, the mental and physical demands of the job. So a lot of these factors came in, which were the more traditional compensable factors. And then there are the slightly more recent thought processes that are going on. So basically the variability in skills. How easy is it to replace that skill? Is the skill going to be there for 5 years, or is the skill going to remain relatively unchanged for a much longer period of time? The learning agility or the cycle time. So is it again a stable job or an evolving job? How do you define interdependence? So there are jobs which not just feed their own outcomes, but jobs that feed the outcomes of many other jobs. What's the business impact? There are certain jobs which are directly contributing to the bottom line, and there are certain other jobs which support those outcomes to be materialized. The nature and strength of interaction. So this is not just about whether the interaction is internal or external, but and to what degree. It is also about the strength of those interactions. So if you're basically looking at it from, say, an organizational network analysis point of view, which are the bigger nodes? Which are the nodes through which a lot of decisions pass through? So that kind of changes the nature of interaction in many organizations. And eventually some HR people hate it, some people have accepted this. There is always a point when the job and the person meet. So how do you personalize the job? So the job is an inanimate thing which is basically on the side. You can define it the way you want to define it, but eventually someone has to do that job. So how do you personalize the job? So basically these are some of the compensable factors that we have kind of listed down, gathered from past experiences, talking to other people in the industry. And then we will open up the session now. And this is pretty much all that I had to say from my side. There is no more kind of corporate jargon coming in, but what we want to do is listen to you. So what we will do from now on is run a series of polls, get your insights and get your opinion, because the idea here is to crowdsource a solution, look at various perspectives and understand how things work. So we are basically on the first poll. If you can please answer this in your in your screens. So do you think that your job evaluation methodology works well for you? So you don't use job evaluation, it works perfectly, works in some areas, and it is not fit for purpose anymore. So any of these choices you could make. And at any point of time, I'm now going to open up the chat section here, and you can basically put in your comment on the chat, and we can get into some kind of a discussion. The answer should be on the, just a second as I kind of fix this screen. Yeah, so the answer would be in the point here. So you should be able to select an option. You should be able to select an option, and then eventually you will be able to submit. Okay, so I can see some people are already saying it is C, which works in some areas. So that's something that's an emerging kind of an area here. Okay, so if you've looked at this area, the second question that we have is, how would you describe your current employer? So basically the type of organization that you're currently working in. Is it a traditional kind of an organization or a sector? Is it a purely technology enabled business? Is it a conglomerate with multiple sectors, some of which could be new, some of which could be traditional? Or is it a traditional industry transforming currently? So if you could choose one of these, and then we can move on to the next ones. And eventually, once we finish these 6 questions, we will start looking at the results, and we will start looking at how this impacts all of us going forward. So that's the second one. The third one is an important one, because most of traditional job evaluation is focused on the premise of any job being represented as an input, process, and output. So there is an input that comes into the job. There are factors that different organizations use, like know-how, knowledge, experience, etc. Then there is the process part of the job, which is basically where the job is being worked on. And as one of my colleague says, if there is no process, you are a post box. So there is a process in it which involves different kinds of solving of different types of problems, working on these. And then there's the output, which is all about impact and business kind of outcomes. So do you think any job can be represented in the context of an input, process, output? So you can say yes, no, or not sure. So that's the third question. The fourth one is possibly a bit controversial, but let's see how you think about this. How important is formal education to your organization? So the choices here, and anything outside of this, you feel free to write in the chat message. We only recruit based on formal education, which basically means you look for a BTech or a BE or a BCom or a CA or something like that. Or we recruit based on practical skills, which means I want a programmer. I don't care what his or her background is. As long as they know the skill, they're fine. Option 3, learning on the job. Yeah.
Nishit, your screen is not showing the questions and the options.
Okay, let me just, but can you all see it on your individual screens?
Yeah, we can, but Nishit, like
can see the poll, but your screen, the one that you are presenting, it's not moving. It's an additional window that is open. You can close or minimize that window. Then I think the presentation be clearly visible.
Are we back now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for pointing
this is
that
poll
out.
1, so you'll have to move.
Nishit, it's poll 1. You have to go to poll 4, perhaps. Poll 4 or 5.
Okay, so poll 4 now. Poll 4 is where we are. We only recruit based on formal education. We recruit based on practical skills. Learning on the job is more important than education, and traditional education is not important to us at all. So you could choose one of these options, and we can move to the fifth one now, which is
Nishit, can you come down to poll 4 once for a while?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, fine.
Okay, we then have poll 5. Let me just remove this one here. Other than the traditional compensable factors, what else is most important for you? And this is where comments are extremely welcome. So the traditional compensable factors being education, experience, problem solving skills, know-how, etc., those kind of areas. And then we've listed down some other alternatives in terms of what could be other compensable factors. And these are business impact, contributions to others' jobs or interdependence, the variability in learning requirements, judgment, risk management, or any other. So if you can choose one of these, and if it is any other, please feel free to input your opinion.
I think business impact was already there when you discussed about the compensable factors initially, the contribution to the bottom line.
That will be the business impact. The contribution to the business line will be the business impact. The bottom line will be the business impact in here.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Nishit, actually, in question 4, 5 particularly, I have not scrolled down other questions. There you should have given multiple choice, because there are often combination of many.
Yes, it is possible, and that's why we are saying that you can input your other opinion in the chat messaging system. So if you go to the chat and feel free to write your opinion, that is something that's going to be very valuable as well. Right. So this is an important question. So we are stopping for a couple of seconds more on this. And if you could go through this, then this is something that is going to feed our eventual solution as to what do people consider as valuable parts or valuable compensable factors. And then we come to the last of the questions. So what type of job evaluation model do you prefer? Do you prefer a point-based or a quantitative system? Do you prefer a decision tree-based system? Do you prefer a whole job slotting system, or any other which you are free to write in the chat messaging system? So this is basically where we are kind of trying to find out what is it that works best for practitioners, because there's no point trying to make a solution that people don't want to use. Most common, obviously, in the industry is the quantitative system, but there are some good decision tree based systems as well. So if you could choose the type of model that works for you. So that was
Nishit, you have to minimize the window again. That window is coming up on screen.
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm trying to stop the screen share. It's somehow, yeah, got it. I'm just trying to stop the screen share because there is no, this was the last slide. This was not meant to be a 30 slide or a 40 slide presentation. So the idea is to kind of get inputs and start looking at discussions, start looking at how to come up to a solution. And maybe Rishabh, if the polls are completed, is it possible for you to share your screen and show some of the results as to how those have come up?
For sure, I'm just giving 1 more minute so that people can fill if they have missed out. And
what I'm going to do is look at some of the comments. We've got quite a few comments so far, so we will look at this.
Guys, if you can see and take the questionnaire, right, it will be very helpful for all of us, because we can discuss over that. We have 34 entries as of now. We had 52 people. If you can take it, we have 1 more minute and we'll end the poll by 7:25.
Nishit, I cannot see the chat box anymore somehow.
You would have it in your window as well, Manas. So if you go down at the bottom of the screen, you would see this chat. Or you want me to share the screen? I'm actually waiting for Rishabh to project the results, and then I'll come on into the chat window, and we will see all of these. Okay. So can everyone see the results of the survey here now?
Yeah, I can see.
So question one, let's look at how it is. About a fifth of the people feel that it works perfectly. A third don't use it at all, which is also not a bad insight. So a lot of people don't use job evaluations. And the remaining, so basically we are talking about close to half of the population, where it works in some areas or they think it is not fit for purpose anymore. But obviously the biggest chunk is works in some areas but doesn't work in others. So I would broadly take it as works in some traditional jobs or more stable or traditional jobs, but not in some of the other newer jobs. The type of participation that we have in here, about half of the population in this meeting comes from technology enabled businesses, and a good 30% comes from traditional organizations that are currently transforming. So the skew here is people who are already using technology in their business as the core or who are transforming to use it. There's about 11% on conglomerates and 14% on traditional sectors.
और ये F के ठीक से डालो, सीधे सीधे डालो, ये देखो कितने छोटे छोटे डाले हैं आपने.
Can I request you to go on mute? Someone has unmute herself,
Yeah.
but it's perfectly
Happens.
fine. We can understand.
It happens. It happens
happens.
with all of that. It's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
So input process output, less than half say yes, about 30% say no. Then let's look at how important is formal education. So if we add up learning on the job and recruitment based on practical skills, we're talking about 76% of the responses. So that's an overwhelming part of the group here, which believes that there is more to work than formal education. So that's not surprising at all. This is pretty much the way in which the business is moving. Compensable factors. So business impact 54%. So obviously that's the most important one overall. Variability in learning requirement comes in next at about 25%. So these two are the main areas. And then the contribution to others' jobs, interdependence, judgment, risk management, and so on. And in terms of the type of job evaluation methodology, quite clear. 2/3 of the team looks at a point-based or quantitative system. So that's great. So we've got some good inputs coming in from the polls, and we've got about 30 minutes or so. And we want to open up the session for people who want to contribute and share their point of view on what they believe we should look at when it comes to the job evaluation methodologies of the future. So if anyone here is interested in sharing their perspective or has a question. So Harsh, I think, is asking a question about how can the job evaluation relevance in the context of the gig worker. Great question. And this is something that is likely to kind of become a bigger and bigger talking point in future. So we will come to this and we will discuss some of these areas. Now, in the room, I know a couple of people who I kind of genuinely believe are experts and can share and give good value. So I'll try and invite some of them, and you can raise your hands and volunteer to participate in this discussion. So maybe can I call upon Debu Mishra, and Debu and I go back to 2004 with our Hewitt days, and some 17 years later, we are still working together in different capacities. Debu's worked at Hewitt, set up the Middle Eastern operations for Hewitt, then worked at Conferry as a partner, worked at Deloitte as a partner, and now he's doing his own things and having fun. He also happens to be on our advisory board. So Debu, can you share your perspective on what you think and where we are headed?
Yeah, so see, let's take the question. Thanks for pulling me up to speak, Nishit. Just as a disclaimer, even when I was at Hewitt and Hay Group, I used to always stay away from job evaluation. And the reason for that is that I always felt that it was outdated. But it's interesting that we are having a discussion about relooking at job evaluation as a methodology after probably its inception. So, and having worked at Hay Group, I also had the opportunity of looking at Edward Hay's formulation of the point-based or factor-based job evaluation. He was the originator of that. And it's very interesting to note that he looked at job evaluation from an industrial engineering perspective. And today in our digital age, I think we need to definitely shift to more of electronics and telecom engineering rather than simple industrial engineering methodology, because jobs are about networks, and the gig worker question is a very, very important discussion. So the gig worker is like a node which comes into the organization and is transient and then goes away, right? So there is no permanence of that. And how do you evaluate the importance of the gig worker or the role that the gig worker is doing? In many ways, I think we need to start looking at jobs not by education and experience, but more and more loaded to the kind of difference they make. So which is that process input, process output kind of a view. What is the transformative effort put in by the role holder or the job holder, and how that contributes or how that enhances value for the organization. So the transformation that the job does of all the input that it receives and the transformation perceived as an output is the biggest or should be the biggest factor. And when you start looking at jobs from that perspective, you can take a very good view of gig workers. You can take a very good view of traditional pyramid-oriented, hierarchy-based organizations. And at the end of the day, from an entrepreneur's perspective, the transformation is what you pay an individual for. And since job evaluation has largely been used for valuing the job worth, if there is no transformation being done by the job, your job worth should not exist, because nobody is going to pay somebody to just be there and not add any value to the input that they receive. So that's broadly the perspective that I have. And I'm very happy that at least we are beginning a conversation. And maybe there is a need to reclassify job evaluation with the terminology of transformation that jobs do.
Okay. Thank you, Debu. Anyone else who wants to contribute and share their perspective? Anyone who wants to bring up another compensable factor or want to comment on skills versus education? That's something that we have here. We've got a very interesting comment from Jairus talking about job evaluation is socialist communist by nature. Would you to buy a house? Doesn't make sense. We have a market which is governed by supply and demand. Jairus, you want to come on board and discuss that a little bit?
Hey, Janice, you there? He's there. He's there. So it will be a very interesting discussion, Nishi, to be very honest, right? If not job evaluation, then what?
Correct. And there is a 1/3 population here who doesn't use job evaluation.
Yes.
Which is fine, because they believe in the demand and supply of the situation, and it may not make sense for them to do anything other than, eventually when you look at it, you do a job evaluation, you come up to a grading structure, you define your pay ranges, and you pay. But we already know what the demand and supply is and how it should be managed. So that's fine. Jairus, I completely get it, buddy. No problem at all. It's 1 a.m. So thank you for still being around. Thank you for joining us.
I have one input, and
yes.
I want your opinion as an industry expert on that. So job evaluation leads to grading and fixation of the pay ranges. That is the ultimate output. However, working in a AI-based tech industry, I have witnessed one use case which is quite restrictive, which restricts the overall efficacy of job evaluation. So if you look at the current structure, it is evolving at such a breakneck speed, the entire tech industry, that mostly whenever you have to hire someone or you have to retain someone, so mostly for those niche roles, you have to go beyond those pay ranges that we finally freeze during the course of a job evaluation. So how can we, however, the entire paradigm of job evaluation is very effective if you look at a holistic scenario. So how can we marry both of these and maybe evolve the methodology of job evaluation to make it more contextual in the current situation or the current scenario of the job market?
That's
And
a
it
great point,
factor in
and
the
that's
it will
something.
factor in the great resignation wave that we are seeing as well in the tech industry, especially in the especially in the service sector.
Yeah. So that completely resonates with me, Shurobit. I have now transitioned into a role of a person running a company. So I'm no longer part of HR as such. In fact, I'm not responsible for HR at VSOR. It's my co-founder who does HR. But I struggle with exactly what you are struggling with. So I'm struggling with attrition. I'm struggling with strange demands in terms of compensation that people come up with. Uh, and then there are skills, for example, that are still very new. So for example, at our front end, we use something called React.js, which is a Facebook kind of a platform and technology, still quite new. If I want to find someone with 10 years of experience, there is no one in the world because this platform isn't 10 years old. So how do
Exactly. That was my question. So, if you look at a skill like React.js, or there are similar niche roles which might not be very niche on paper, but when you look at the industry, those people are very far and few. So, if you look at the data science industry, if you look at roles like, principal engineer, or a role like technical architect, solution architect, so these kind of roles, how do you kind of use a paradigm of job evaluation to come at a decision making so that it helps you with the decision making part? you know
exactly?
uh,
So this is where if we have to kind of make sense of it, we need to have a compensable factor that is different from education. Now, the way we typically deal with software engineers is that we generally get a BTech or a BE or someone who's got an engineering degree. Don't even look at what is the specialization in that engineering degree. Get an engineer, train them up on a specific area and get them to work. Now, if we look at it, what is the difference between a commerce graduate who's learned 2 years of data science versus a ceramic engineer who's learned data science for 2 years? So on the job, you would see that there isn't much of a difference because what you are applying on the job is not what you studied. Your application of this on the job is a specific skill which is slightly different from what was the formal form of education in college. But at the same time, we need to understand which are these skills. So in compensation terms, we would always assign something called a hot skill, and we would kind of put in a hot skill kind of an allowance or adjust the pay range to kind of fit or basically change the target pay for these kind of jobs to factor in a higher kind of an inflation in pay rates for these kind of jobs. But when it comes to the worth of the job, the relative worth of the job, we still need to take into account the fact that you may have two different programmers. One is a Java programmer. There are lots and lots of those, tons of them in the market. And then there is someone who's in a relatively new skill area. So you don't have those many enough of those. So that's the whole pursuit of the solution. We are looking to identify what is it that makes sense in terms of identifying the relative worth of jobs. So transience
So
of skill
Nishi,
set. Hmm?
I'll just one question which came up, which is the relative worth of jobs. Is this the time to even revisit that? Because the relative worth of job is largely contextual to a pyramid based organization, so hierarchy. So you stack jobs so that you need a relative worth. And the
Exactly,
more
for a flatter organization which does not have many hierarchical levels. For example, if we take a startup, or let's take unicorns as well, which cannot be termed as startup, but again they have, I mean, huge. I mean, most of these unicorns would have a headcount of 1,000 plus, but they are still somehow maintaining that flatter hierarchy. So, is that relative relevance or relative worth of job still a valid point in today's scenario? That's my question. Or do we
Well,
need to revisit it?
I
I'll
can
just
share.
add one more point to it. I'll just add one perspective and then I'll hand it back. See, many years ago, there was a movement of, so not from the field of HR, but from the field of finance. There was a movement which was activity-based costing. And in many cases, personally, I have found activity-based costing far more relevant and accurate than job evaluation. Because what activity-based costing does is that it says that how much does, see, job worth or job evaluation is assigning a worth to a job. Now, that takes into consideration, we need to be very clear that it takes into consideration of the starting point of assignment of worth to a job is the job itself. So the structure of the job is very, very important for it. And I have seen many client organizations in the past where I've worked, people raise the job worth by assigning, complex factors to a job so that the worth goes up, because the point factor allows that to happen, right? So people structure jobs to increase its value so that they can pay that individual more. But if you take activity-based costing, the most important factor is that how much does it cost me to perform an activity? And I'll give you a very interesting, I'll just take a minute, Nishit, to just give this example.
Sure.
So this is a client where you also worked with me on that project. So we were doing a project for a client in Mauritius, and this was a tour operator. So they used to sell holidays, international holidays. And we were trying to figure out how to reduce their payroll cost. So we looked at one job, and I'm just giving that example of one job. So they had these people who received calls of inquiry for holidays. So they received the call, they took down the requirement, and then they called all the hotels on the island of Mauritius and checked for availability for those dates, prepared offers for these individuals and mailed it to them. Now, when you look at the complexity of this job, it is negotiation, it is information handling, it is transcribing, it is customer service because you're interacting with the customer. So you put all of that together, that job is very high worth. And the amount of volume they could handle was very low. But if you break it down into activities, a person can take only 5 or 6 phone calls a day because they're doing all of these other activities as well, right? So the cost of receiving the phone call is absolutely impossible for an organization to afford. But if you separate those out, so if you have only operators who receive the query and another set of people who do the negotiation with the hotels, you are able to rationalize it perfectly well. So I believe activity-based costing is a far better method to look at the value of job because it takes that transformation also into consideration. So what input, what is the process, so what is the activity, and how much does it cost me? And is the transformative value of that cost higher than what I'm incurring? So am I getting a return for that cost? There is an ROI on that investment in that job. Activity-based costing is a far better measure, is what it just suddenly realized, you can use this for, you look at platforms like Upwork, which are not an organization. A UX designer you can get for $100 an hour. You can get it for $30 an hour. You can get it for $500 an hour. It's the same job. So this whole internal worth and external parity carries no meaning. There is a market, there is demand, and you have affordability. So you decide which of these spectrum you are willing to pay for. It's like a stock market. You can afford only certain stocks. Not all the stocks you can afford to invest because you have a finite, budget in hand. So I think it's a complex thing that it is activity-based costing, demand supply, and affordability, all of those rolled together into one complex formula of sorts.
And same thing holds for doctors and lawyers and accountants it's the same job. There are two cardiologists and they on paper have the same job description and they would have the same point score, but the value they command is way beyond. So, but that's also
Nisit, I would like to add perspective to what
yes, sure.
Sura was saying. See, I was conducting a lot of work level studies and all. Now, while translating this job evaluation into the real life situation or making people to understand what is the criticality of the job. An interesting finding, in 90% of cases where we have conducted this work level, even L0 people never mentioned when we asked a question, what is your primary task? Even 90% didn't say that contributing to the profit of the organization. What I want to mean, people are coming to work to perform their routine jobs without understanding the purpose of the role for which the role exists. How do we tackle this situation?
That is a very deep question. And that's pretty much all about aligning the role of the janitor to sending the spaceship at NASA. That's the whole kind of common purpose that we talk about. So obviously it is important, and this is not something that we have to look at in isolation. So obviously job evaluation in isolation to me nothing at all. You could have a grade less organization, an organization which does not have any grades at all, and I've had clients who did not have grades, who just had jobs, who did individual job pricing and who paid based on individual job pricing. So this whole concept of kind of keeping grades is meant to simplify something, but then again, it shouldn't straitjacket the solution. So eventually when it comes to pay a hot scale or something which is short in supply, we'd kind of go back. One of the consulting firms uses a 3P principle of pay for performance, pay for the person, and pay for position. So obviously there are multiple different components that go into the eventual decision about how much you would like to pay. And that same applies. The job description of the two doctors would be the same, but then you're paying for the person and you're basically paying for what they have built up in their careers as their success stories, as their kind of criteria of patients that they have solved. And it becomes a very different experience, even though on paper the jobs are the same. And at the same time, you would always end up differentiating between a good performer and a not so good performer, because even though the job size is the same, you would end up paying differently to these two, whether it's your merit matrix or whether it's your bonus multiples. The pay eventually is different. But the point here is, how can we still rationalize some of this complexity and make it simple? So there will be demand and supply. There will be things like that completely look very different, things like the activity-based costing, or looking at gig platforms like Upwork or places like those, where people set a price for their work, they get work, they show good results, they get a 5-star rating, and then they increase their price. So these are some of the things that exist. These are things that did not exist 4 or 5 or 10 years ago, and we have to take these into account. And a number of your employees may not be full-time employees going forward. You could have a portfolio of different types of talent segments that come and solve your problems. So the question then would be, your internal staff versus the gig employees and those who you hire on platforms would be very different, even though they may end up doing the same job. I've already seen this is kind of becoming quite common in consulting, where consulting firms don't necessarily hire a senior person full time, but depending on need, they go and subcontract a specific set of work to them. So yeah, there's a lot of change happening. To look at some of the other comments, there's Rahul who says there is, I wonder whether specialists really understand the power of J methods, oftentimes we eagerly adopt education and experience as a differentiator. Completely agree with you, Rahul. So in fact, even when I went in through my certification and I had this thick folder in which I was taking copious notes, the whole thing was kind of frozen by the time we finished education and experience, because the trainer, who was a very, very experienced job evaluator, basically says, look at this combination, give these number of points, and then everything follows from there. So we somehow in actual implementation take the easy way out. The recruiter understands education and experience. The job evaluator understands experience and education, and that's the easy way out. May not be the right way out. So obviously this is, you're right. There is possibly a dumbing down of the process that happens in reality. So that's something that we have to kind of watch out for. There is
Nishit,
yeah.
hi, may
No,
I just put in?
yeah,
Yeah,
I know
sorry.
that.
Hi, sorry. What I have to say may just take a little too long to type, so please bear with me. So I have two conflicting thoughts. Let me get the more radical one out of the way first, which is that we really don't need job evaluation right now, right? And that's why, I mean, it's more paperwork, and it's just creating more employment for HR without really showing value. That's my first reaction. And this will keep on, my guess is that this will be applicable to more and more organizations as as we get into the 2020s and 2030s, right? But coming back from a perspective that let's assume that job evaluation is important, and we need to do it and all. The whole part is that the whole point is that we are looking at the worth of the job, right? Now the insight which I feel I have sort of understood is that the worth of the job is very contextual, and therefore it also depends on the other jobs surrounding it, right? And I'm talking of a closed system. I'm not talking about the external rewards, etc. right now. I'm just talking of it as a pure play internal system, right? Just to make it easier to sort of comprehend. And therefore it is, think of it as a school of fish moving, right? The worth of the jobs will also be highly dependent on each other, because the impact which is created is not created by one job, but it is created by a series of jobs working in tandem.
Correct.
Right? So from a framework perspective, I would probably want to explore this idea more, where we say that, okay, which are the jobs which are close by, how do they network with each other, right? And how do they produce value?
Yeah.
Right? And then there are close jobs, and there are near jobs and far jobs, and so on and so forth. And that's where the mathematics might perhaps come in eventually. But my thought is that if we think of the school of fish metaphor, I think it might work, and that interestingly will also make it more agnostic towards the structure of the organization, because it may not be hierarchical, or it may or may not be hierarchical. It doesn't matter. If I am producing value with the CEO, right? The consideration will be my job and the CEO's job together, or the janitor. It doesn't matter, right? So maybe a system, and these are very initial thoughts, but maybe a system which takes multiple jobs into account, which help that job create value, might perhaps work, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll just
Can I add one point here?
Yes,
we have been talking about job evaluation and trying to figure out which is the best approach to decide a relative worth. So, I was just trying to put something thoughts to words. So I was struggling, but Nandan could bring it to the discussion. So it is not, before we get into the relative worth, we need to look at which are the jobs and how they are placed and all. But before that, what is happening is, even in a traditional industry which is transforming, a lot of jobs are getting created. Some of them are disappearing and new jobs are coming, and nobody knows what are these jobs. It would be the same for a startup founder. He just knows what needs to be done. There are no jobs in picture yet. So what they will do, they will go and find the best people who think could help them. So we are always talking in terms of expertise when there are no standardized jobs and framework available in a kind of a transformational or a startup scenario. So we need to start looking at job design and job evaluation together not separately. So, we need to start from the design aspect itself.
Good point.
Nishit, I
tend to
have a question for you.
Yes.
An organization usually goes through a cycle, like there is a build phase, there is a growth phase, and then finally there is a maturity phase where it hits the plateau. So is there a particular kind of a stage where we should have the job evaluation in? Usually the organizations go for a job evaluation or a com benchmarking after they reach the maturity space. But let's take the example of a smaller organization when it is still growing. So do you think at that stage a job evaluation or even benchmarking would make sense, or should they wait for the time till they hit a certain plateau and consolidate?
I think it's not about the plateau. I think it's about a certain critical mass. So I still remember it was possibly March of last year, and we were about to hire the first set of employees in VSOR. And I don't come from a technology background at all. All my experience has been non-technology related. And I was talking to our CTO, and I was asking him, listen, you want an iOS developer, you want an Android developer, you want a backend developer, you want a business analyst, and now you want a designer, you want quality assurance. How do I know which job is more senior and which jobs we should budget more for? And literally in 3 minutes, he was able to give me a hierarchy of jobs and says, this is the biggest job, this is the smallest job, these two jobs are similar. And I asked, how do you know? And he would explain it to me. And this guy has no experience in HR, exactly like I have no experience of IT. And he would say, this person's job impacts the jobs of 3 other people. This job is very simple because it just draws out certain things, and the other guy, and it's just a small input into the other guy. These 3 jobs are replicable because tomorrow I can change these technologies when the technology becomes better. So there are factors that you can rationally consider and do whole job slotting. You don't need to make it a very complex job evaluation process, but a paired comparison, a whole job slotting, those are the options that are always available for you, whatever the size and scale of your organization. And then obviously as it increases in complexity, then you need to kind of have certain norms and ways of managing that complexity. There was just 1 second before I bring you in. So I'll give my example. So I've worked in organizations that did not have job evaluation at all. There was absolute total disregard for job evaluation. And then I worked in an organization which had job evaluation committees, and we had about 35 people certified by HAY, and we had all kinds of bureaucracy or process around how to evaluate a job. And both worked because the context was different. In the first organization, it was very fast paced. People were paid based on market. They were paid based on compensation. No one even asked, why am I in this grade? They were happy or unhappy with their pay. That was the primary point of discussion. In the second organization, it was a little bit more mature and a little bit more kind of stable. And there the discussion was, we need a way to justify why you are in a specific grade and internally be sure of whether this job is bigger or smaller than the other. And everyone fully understands that even if you're using a very sophisticated or time-tested point factor system, you are still applying judgment at every single stage. So your final score is a sum of 6 different judgments rather than one judgment. So there's nothing that scientific in that process. It just that it brings it under a cover of structure, and you can justify your decision saying that you are following a very structured approach and a professional approach. And if you are level 17, you are level 17. I can't do anything about it. So it works on the context of the organization as well. Debu, you want to kind of go on that or something else?
No, I wanted to, but I was hoping that Edward, who had raised his hand,
Yes,
would get
yes.
to speak, but I think he's
Okay.
dropped out.
Edward.
Do
Okay.
you see him? Okay, so log back in. So let me share one perspective about jobs in the context of relativity. See, there are multiple points being raised which we need to start looking at it from the individual's perspective. And since now I'm working very closely on how people take decisions on careers, so the insight around that is pretty interesting. If I work in an organization, let's say we were having the discussion about, let's say any engineer, I get hired and I work in an organization, and I just completed a series of interviews with 50 engineers, thinking through why they joined an organization and why some of the colleagues had left. An individual looks at their role in the organization and they triangulate three things. Does this organization value me fairly? So is the job work that they assigned to my job, is it fair? And that fairness is determined, is it close to what I see myself worth, my self-worth? Is it close to that? And the third triangulation data is it close to what the market perceives it as? Now, the moment there is a disparity between any of these three data points, I have dissonance with the organization. So job evaluation.
The three points that you just mentioned. One is
Yeah.
one is the worth of the individual with respect to the market, and what were the other two?
So what the market values me as, what I think is my value. Second, third is what the organization is assigning as a value to me. Okay. So these are three values. If there is incongruency in any three, so let me explain that. If the organization values me more than the market, then I might become irrelevant to the market in the long term. So in the short term, I might benefit, but I might be irrelevant to the market because the organization, for some strange reason, is assigning a far greater value and is making me unviable for the external market. If my value is higher,
I've used before. That is a compensation strategy I've used before to outprice certain people in the market.
Exactly. And if my self-worth is higher than what the organization is valuing, then I'll exit anyways. If the market is valuing me more than what the organization is valuing, I'll exit anyway. So in all the three situations, one of these which is misaligned, I will exit. So what is important is to understand, and I like the question, I think Hannah mentioned this whole how you craft a job. If I were to ask everybody who's attending this, how scientific is a job description or job crafting in your organization? I can bet I have still not come across any organization where people have said that we use a scientific approach for writing jobs. It is either copy paste or a consultant has come. I call it the Valmiki approach to job description writing. You sit down and say, "Ye job kaisa hona chahiye?" or "How should this job look like? Do I have references?" And I copy and paste, and that's how jobs are written. The most unscientific way. And we base job evaluation on that. There cannot be a bigger fallacy because the genesis of job evaluation based on the job description of the job, architecture, that whole thing is unscientific.
Yeah. So your end outcome, it's garbage in, garbage out. You can have a good methodology, you have a bad job description, you have a bad outcome.
No, what Debu said, I often used this third part of non-alignment. I often used to pay for critical roles the candidate more than the market, so that he finds it difficult to find a job later on.
Yeah.
So Nishit, I don't think I had shared it with you. So right now, hopefully by next month, we are going to be launching a JD writer inspired by Facebook. So you just enter the title, job title, and it creates a reference of all the jobs with the same title globally and provides you with what is the median and what are the other factors that you can pick and choose from, so that you know that you are either close or far away from what the industry norms are.
Yeah, soon we'll have bots and kind of online tools creating everything for us, including job evaluation outcomes, I'm quite sure. So input something or link it to something on Facebook or LinkedIn and you'd have a score out there. Maybe
Absolutely.
that's something we should work on.
Yeah, let's do that.
Right. So we
But
know
Devo, what you said is very interesting, but at the same time, that global data may work as a reference point. But while I am writing a JD, say for a client of mine, unless I conduct a scientific study of each elements of the job roles, would it be very significant or very specific to the organization as such? That's a doubt. We can talk about this when we talk about this later on, but that's a food for thought.
Yeah, and it's also, we can take inspiration from enterprise resource planning software. So when you look at ERP implementation, so there is a very interesting statistic. So everybody talks about industry 4.0, right? So industry 3.0 was all about computerization.
Yeah.
And we had absolutely no returns from all the computerization that happened in the last 3 decades. And the
Very
reason
true.
for that is that we took ERP kind of systems and we customized it to such an extent that we lost the value of standardization. See, the reason why you pay somebody very high value for an ERP software is that they come with industry standards which you can incorporate into the organization. And in India and most parts of the world, we did exactly the opposite. We took the standards and customized it, saying that, oh, we are
To the
very
SAP.
unique, our context is very different, and paid heavy money and eroded all the value. Now, you can think of jobs from the context of ERP, because human resources are also resources from an enterprise perspective.
Of course.
So what is a standard executive or sales executive in insurance? What is a standard sales executive in pharma? There should be standards. There should be norms or benchmarks, because that is how you create relatability across that industry. And you also create differentiation from other industries. One of the biggest problems which happened in India is that sales executive for telecom, financial services, automotive, and FMCG
All
were
are
the same
same.
set of people. So if you were relevant for one job, you had 4 industries to shift into, and 0 expertise in any of the industries.
More than the sales, it's more relevant for IT and HR. Finance also, to a great extent.
Great. I'm conscious of time. Some people have been messaging that they're kind of leaving. So I think we've already gone past our due, and it's
8 minutes. Yeah.
in the evening on a weekend. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rishabh, for kind of agreeing to host this on our behalf.
Thanks.
Thank you to everyone who participated, Debu, Manas, Nandan, Arfa, everyone who contributed to these discussions. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Rishabh.
We'll
Thanks.
keep on doing such sessions.
you.
So please join.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Nishi, for taking this
Thank
lead
you,
on that.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.